The city of Varenth shook under the roar of plasma cannons. Human soldiers fought shoulder to shoulder with alien allies, their defenses crumbling as enemy war machines advanced through the ruins. Smoke filled the air. Fire cracked across broken walls, and every blast lit up the faces of those too stubborn to surrender. Among them was a young human soldier named Kale, his rifle humming with power as he moved through the wreckage. He was not the strongest among his people, but he had learned to survive where others fell. Every step he took carried both fear and fire, a mix that kept him alive in a battlefield no one expected him to walk away from. The war had begun without warning. What was supposed to be a meeting of peace had been turned into an ambush. Armored legions stormed the halls of the royal citadel, and the once proud towers of Varenth cracked beneath bombardment. Kale had not come as a warrior of fame, but as part of a small guard detail assigned to keep the visiting human envoy safe. The envoy was dead now, along with most of the human staff, and Kale found himself cut off, his only thought to survive long enough to find a way out. But fate had other plans for him. In the chaos, he had stumbled across a figure draped in torn royal silks, her violet armor broken but still gleaming faintly under soot and ash. She was unlike anyone Kale had ever seen, her long pink hair flowing wildly, her glowing skin marked with faint patterns that seemed alive. Curved black horns rose from her head, giving her a fearsome beauty even in ruin. She was no ordinary warrior. She was the Princess of Varenth, daughter of the alien queen, the very one the enemy had come to capture. Kyle had no time to think about titles or politics. The princess stumbled as a falling beam nearly crushed her, and Kale rushed forward without hesitation. The smoke made her hard to see, and when he grabbed at her to drag her free, his hand caught one of her horns. With all his strength, he pulled her out from beneath the crashing rubble. She gasped, not in fear but in something stranger, something that made her cheeks burn with sudden color. For a single heartbeat, her eyes widened at his touch, and the sound that escaped her lips was not the cry of a warrior, but something softer, something that sent confusion racing through Kale's mind. She clung to him after, her breath fast, her body trembling as if the battle had suddenly vanished and only his grip mattered. Kale shook the dust from his hair, still stunned that he had managed to pull her to safety. Around them, the enemy closed in, soldiers shouting in a language he barely understood. The princess's hand gripped his armor, and her eyes locked onto his with a strange intensity. "You touched my horn," she whispered, her voice fierce yet shaken. Kyle blinked, still holding his rifle in one hand, his other hand steadying her by the shoulder. "I just saved your life," he said simply, but his words seemed to matter less than the way she looked at him. It was as if the entire war had shrunk to that single moment, her eyes filled with something he couldn't name. The walls shook again as another blast tore through the street. Kyle knew they had to move. He tightened his grip on her hand and pulled her into the cover of a broken archway. Her people might have seen a human soldier as weak or out of place, but Kale had no room for doubt now. He had chosen to act, and for reasons he did not yet understand, the princess was no longer looking at him as a stranger. She looked at him as if he had changed something inside her, and the battlefield suddenly felt different. Kyle raised his rifle, ready to cut down anyone who came too close. The princess still held on to him, her cheeks glowing hotter than the fires around them. In that chaos, she whispered one word he would never forget, a word that carried both command and desire. Again. Kale was not sure what unsettled him more, the storm of battle raging outside or the way the princess refused to let go of his arm. Her fingers clung to his armor as though he was the only anchor in a collapsing world. He had pulled comrades from fire before, carried bleeding men across broken fields, but this was different. The princess looked at him as if he had awakened something forbidden, something dangerous, and now she would not let him out of her sight. They crouched under the ruined archway, dust falling like ash from the ceiling. The ground trembled as heavy enemy walkers marched through the streets, their metal feet pounding like drums of doom. Kale peeked around the corner, counting shadows, noting the rhythm of patrols. He had no plan to be a hero. His only thought was survival. Yet every time his gaze slid back to her, the princess made him hesitate. Leaving her behind was no longer possible. She studied him in silence, her glowing markings shifting faintly across her skin. Then, to his surprise, she reached out and touched his face. Her hand was warm, almost burning, and her eyes glowed with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "You saved me," she said, voice soft but firm, as if the words carried more weight than simple gratitude. You touched what no one is allowed to touch. You don't understand what that means. Kale frowned, confused, but kept his voice steady. I wasn't thinking. You were about to be crushed. That's all. Her lips curved, not in anger, but in something stranger. Almost a smile, almost hunger. You think it was nothing. But you marked me. In my people's law, in our hearts, when someone touches the horn, they bind themselves to us. You cannot walk away now, and I will not let you. The soldier blinked, his pulse racing. This was madness, a battlefield wrapped in blood and fire, and she spoke of bonds and rules he did not understand. He wanted to argue, but the way she looked at him made his throat dry. She believed what she said, and the way her hands trembled as she held him made him believe too. A shout echoed from the street. Enemy soldiers had noticed movement. Kale cursed under his breath, snapping his rifle up as he leaned out from the broken stone. A squad of armored warriors stormed forward, their weapons glowing with lethal light. He opened fire, each shot tearing through the smoke, his aim calm even as the air shook with return fire. Sparks rained against the wall, stone shattered, and heat seared across his cheek. The princess pressed herself against him, her own armor cracked but her spirit unbroken. To his shock, she drew a short blade from her hip, its edge glowing faintly with alien energy. When one of the enemy charged too close, she lunged past Kale and drove the blade into its chest with a snarl. The soldier collapsed and she turned back to him, her breath sharp, her eyes wild. You fight like us, she said, her voice almost proud. But you are different. You move without fear. Kyle shook his head, firing again until the street fell silent. Fear keeps me alive, he muttered. But she was no longer listening to his words. Her gaze stayed fixed on him, her lips parting slightly, her body leaning closer as though pulled by invisible strings. For a heartbeat, the battlefield seemed to vanish. It was only the two of them, pressed together in ruin and smoke, bound by something neither fully understood. Kyle tried to focus on the war, but the princess's whisper cut through the fire and steel. You belong to me now. Her voice carried no doubt, no question, only certainty. And as Kale stared into her glowing eyes, he felt the weight of that vow settle over him like chains made of fire. The war had become personal. Kyle forced himself to move quickly, scanning the ruined streets for a path forward. Staying in one place meant death. He could already hear the whir of drones circling above, searching for survivors. The princess clung to his side, her steps unsteady but determined. Her violet armor was scratched and scorched, yet her bearing carried the pride of royalty. She should have been with her guard, not stumbling through fire with a human soldier at her side. But the truth was clear. Without him, she would already be dead. As they hurried through a broken corridor, Kale's mind kept circling back to her words. You belong to me now. He tried to push them away, tried to remind himself that this was war, not a dream. Yet every time her hand brushed his arm, every time her glowing eyes met his, he felt the weight of her claim pressing deeper. It unsettled him more than the enemy's guns. They reached a collapsed plaza. Statues of her ancestors lay broken on the ground, shattered into stone fragments. Smoke curled from burning towers and the air shimmered with heat. Kale crouched low, pulling the princess down beside him. He pointed toward a narrow service tunnel half buried under rubble. That way, he whispered. It might lead us under the walls. But she did not move at once. She stared at the broken statues, her face tight with pain. Then she looked back at Kale, and her voice carried a strange mix of sorrow and fierce determination. They want me alive, she said. That is why they have not burned everything. My mother's crown means nothing to them if they do not have me. But you changed the moment you touched me. You became more dangerous than they realize. Kale frowned. I'm just a soldier trying to get you out. Her lips parted in a small, almost defiant smile. No, you are mine. That means you are part of me now. They cannot take me without taking you, and I will not let them. Before he could answer, a sudden blast rocked the plaza. Enemy troops surged through the smoke, their weapons raised, armored shapes closing fast. Kale swore, pulling the princess behind broken stone as plasma fire ripped through the air. The world turned into a storm of sparks and smoke. He fired in quick bursts, each shot precise, his body moving on instinct. Years of training kept him alive, but it was not enough. They were outnumbered. A blast struck the ground near him, throwing both him and the princess to the dirt. For a moment his ears rang and the world spun. When his vision cleared, he saw one of the enemy reaching for the princess, claws outstretched. Without thinking, Cale grabbed her again, his hand closing around her horn as he yanked her against him away from danger. The enemy's strike missed, and Cale drove his knife into the soldier's neck, pulling the body down in a spray of sparks and blood. The princess froze in his grip, her breath catching sharply. A sound escaped her lips again, soft and trembling, and her body pressed against his as if she could not stop herself. Her cheeks glowed hotter than fire, her eyes wide and filled with something that made Cale's pulse quicken. "You did it again," she whispered, her voice shaking. Cale stared at her confused, the battlefield still raging around them. "I pulled you to safety." Her hand rose, touching the one that still held her horn. "No," she said fiercely, her voice almost breaking. "You claimed me again, and now I will follow you anywhere." The battle did not wait for their words. More soldiers pushed forward, and Cale tightened his grip on his rifle. But deep inside, he knew the war had already shifted. Saving the princess was no longer about duty or survival. Somehow, without meaning to, he had tied himself to her in a way that went beyond blood and battle. And he was beginning to fear what that meant. Kyle led the princess through the narrow tunnel he had spotted, their footsteps echoing off cracked stone walls. The air inside was damp and heavy, but at least it kept them hidden from drones and walkers above. He moved cautiously, his rifle raised, every sense sharp. The princess stayed close, her breath warm against his shoulder, her hand gripping his armor as if she refused to let him drift even a step away. Every few moments, she glanced at him with that strange intensity, her glowing eyes watching his every move. Cale pretended not to notice, but it was impossible to ignore the way she looked at him, like she was memorizing every line of his face. He wanted to focus on escape, but her presence pressed against his mind as strongly as the danger outside. At last, they reached a chamber where the tunnel widened. Broken machinery lay scattered across the floor, old transport units that hadn't been used in years. Cale knelt to check his rifle, reloading with quick, steady hands. The princess knelt beside him, her hands trembling slightly, though not from fear. "You do not understand what you've done," she whispered, her voice low but filled with power. Kyle sighed. "You keep saying that. You say I've claimed you, that I've bound us, but I only grabbed your horn to keep you alive." Her lips curved into a half-smile and she leaned closer. "Among my people, the horn is sacred. It is our pride, our strength, our heart. To touch it is more than rescue. It is a vow. You may not have spoken the words, but your actions spoke for you, and my heart has answered." Cale shook his head, trying to keep his focus sharp. "This is a battlefield, princess. Your enemies won't care about vows. But I care," she replied firmly, her hand resting on his chest. "And you will learn to care too. You cannot undo it." Before he could respond, a distant rumble shook the tunnel. Enemy forces were moving above them, the sound of heavy machines grinding across stone. Cale motioned for silence and scanned the walls for another exit. The princess followed without hesitation, her blade drawn. He was starting to notice that even in her obsession, she moved like a fighter, ready to strike down anything that threatened them. They found a broken stairway leading upward. Cale climbed first, then pulled her up behind him. When their hands touched, she shivered, her grip tightening as if she didn't want to let go. He avoided her eyes, but inside his chest something stirred that made him uneasy. At the top, they emerged into another ruin. The city stretched out before them, burning towers, collapsed bridges, and rivers of smoke cutting the sky. Patrols moved below, searching, hunting. Cale scanned quickly, then pointed toward the distant mountain pass. "If we can reach those ridges, we'll have a chance. Beyond them, human lines are holding." The princess nodded, though her gaze never left him. "Then I will walk where you walk, fight where you fight, even die if you die." Cale's jaw tightened. "Don't say that." "It is not a choice," she said, almost gently. "You touched my horn twice. You bound me. My soul cannot be pulled away now." A sudden whine split the air and Cale's instincts screamed. He tackled her just as a plasma bolt struck the wall behind them, showering sparks. Enemy scouts had found their trail. Cale pulled the princess to cover, his rifle roaring as he fired back. The fight was fast and brutal, his movements sharp, hers almost graceful as she struck with her blade. Together they cut down the patrol, their bodies moving like they had trained side by side for years. When the last soldier fell, the princess turned to him, her chest rising and falling quickly. Her face was flushed, her eyes blazing. She reached for him, gripping his armor, and whispered, "Do it again. Save me again." Claim me again." Kyle stared at her, torn between fear and something deeper. The war around them was burning everything away, but somehow in the middle of it, he had become the center of her world. And he didn't know if he could escape it, even if he wanted to. The night air was sharp as Kale guided the princess through broken alleys, always moving toward the shadow of the mountains. Fires still burned across the city, but patrols had grown thicker and every corner brought new danger. He was tired, his body aching from the endless fight, but he did not slow. If he faltered, both of them would die. The princess stayed pressed close to him, her hand never leaving his armor. At first he thought it was fear that made her cling so tightly. But the way her eyes lingered on him, the way she shivered when his hand brushed hers, told him it was something else. She had bound herself to him in ways he still struggled to understand. And now, in the ruins of her own kingdom, she seemed more concerned with him than with her crown. They paused in a dark courtyard where shattered fountains lay dry. Kale crouched to check their path again, scanning with tired eyes. The princess knelt beside him, her long pink hair glowing faintly in the moonlight. She studied him like she was trying to memorize every detail. "You fight like a storm," she said softly, "but you carry yourself like one who expects nothing. Why do you risk yourself for me, human?" Kale shook his head, keeping his voice steady. "Because leaving you wasn't an option. You'd have died back there." Her lips curved in a small smile. "And every time you touch my horn, you do more than save me. You make me yours again. Do you not see? You cannot stop it. I cannot stop it. It is stronger than both of us." He frowned, uneasy. "I don't need someone bound to me. I need to get you out alive." But her eyes only softened and she whispered, "Alive, yes, but alive with you." Before Kale could answer, a sudden sound broke the night, distant engines humming low. He motioned for silence and pulled her behind the stone fountain. A transport hovered into the courtyard, its lights cutting across the ruins. He tensed, ready for another fight. But as the craft lowered, he recognized the markings. It was not the enemy. It was a rebel ship, one of the hidden resistance units that still fought for the royal family. 3 figures stepped out, cloaked in ragged armor. They froze when they saw Kale and the princess, then quickly dropped to one knee. "Your Highness," one of them said breathlessly. "We feared you were lost." The princess lifted her chin with pride, though her hand stayed on Kale's arm. "I live. Because of him." Their eyes flicked to the human soldier, surprise written across their faces. Humans were not known for lasting long on this battlefield. Yet here he was, standing strong beside her. One of the rebels frowned. "Your Highness, we must take you to safety. The Queen commands your return." The princess shook her head, her gaze never leaving Kale. "No, I go where he goes." The rebels exchanged uncertain glances. Kale felt the weight of their stares, suspicion clear in their eyes. He knew they saw him as an outsider, perhaps even as a thief who had stolen the princess's loyalty. He wanted to argue, to insist she return with them, but she gripped his arm tighter. "You don't understand," she told the rebels firmly. "He touched my horn twice. He is bound to me now. I will not leave his side." The rebels' eyes widened, shock flashing across their faces. They lowered their heads, whispering among themselves in their own tongue. Kale caught fragments, words like chosen, bound, sacred. Whatever law she spoke of was real to them, and it seemed to terrify them as much as it bound her to him. Finally, one of the rebels spoke again, his voice trembling. "Then we must protect him as we protect you, princess. For if he is yours, he is now part of the crown itself." Kale's stomach tightened. He had not asked for any of this. He only wanted to survive the night. But as the rebels bowed to him as well, Kale realized his life had shifted in a way he could not control. He had not just saved a princess. He had stepped into something much larger, something that tied him to her fate, and perhaps to the fate of her entire people. And the princess, still pressed against his side, smiled as though she had gotten exactly what she wanted. The rebels led them through hidden passages under the broken city. Their movements were quick, their voices low, every sound drowned by the distant thunder of enemy engines above. Kale kept his rifle ready, his eyes sharp, but what unsettled him more than the danger was the way the rebels treated him. They walked with respect, even caution, as if he carried some power he did not understand. The princess never let go of him. Her hand rested lightly on his arm, but her presence pressed against him like a weight. Her eyes glowed in the dim tunnels, fixed on him as though nothing else mattered. Even surrounded by her own people, she stayed at his side, her grip on him unshaken. One of the rebels, a tall warrior with scarred armor, finally broke the silence. "Human," he said carefully. "Do you know what it means to touch the horn of the royal line?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "I only pulled her out from falling rebel. That's all." The warrior shook his head slowly, almost in pity. "No, that is never all. The horn is sacred. For centuries, no outsider has touched it and lived. But you not only touched it, you did it twice. And she accepted it. Do you know what that makes you?" Kale looked at him evenly. "A soldier trying to keep her alive." The princess's voice cut through before anyone else could speak. "It makes him mine. That is enough." The rebels fell silent, none daring to argue. Kyle felt the heat rise in his chest, a mix of frustration and confusion. He wanted to say she was wrong, that this bond was a misunderstanding. But the way she looked at him made the words stick in his throat. Hours later, they reached an underground chamber. Old banners hung from cracked walls and scattered supplies showed it had become a temporary base. The rebels urged the princess to rest, but she refused unless Kale stayed close. He sat across from her, trying to clean his weapon. But her gaze burned into him until finally he had to look up. "You are different," she said quietly. "Not like the others I have seen. When you touched me, you didn't think of power or gain. You only thought of saving me. That is why I cannot let you go." Kale rubbed a hand over his face. "Princess, you're confusing gratitude with something else." Her lips curved into a stubborn smile. "No, you don't understand my people. Gratitude fades. Bonds do not." Before he could answer, a scout rushed into the chamber, panting hard. "The enemy knows. They are moving this way. Walkers, soldiers, everything. They must have tracked us." The rebels scrambled to prepare, weapons raised, eyes sharp. Kale stood at once, pulling the princess to her feet. The chamber shook as distant blasts echoed closer. One rebel turned to the princess. "Your Highness, we must flee deeper. There are tunnels that lead beyond the mountains," but she shook her head. "No, I will not run while he stands to fight." Kale frowned. "You'll get killed if you stay." She stepped closer, her glowing markings brightening as her hand pressed against his chest. "Then I will die with you. My vow is sealed. I am already yours." Before Kale could argue, the wall split with fire. Enemy soldiers stormed through the tunnels, their weapons blazing. The rebels clashed with them, the chamber turning into chaos. Kale pulled the princess behind cover, his rifle spitting fire. He fought with every ounce of strength, every shot precise, but the enemy numbers were overwhelming. The princess stayed at his side, her blade glowing as she struck down anyone who came near. And in the heart of battle, when Kale reached for her again to shield her from a falling beam, his hand brushed her horn a third time. Her cry rose above the clash of war, not of pain, but of something deeper, something that sent shivers racing through the rebels who heard it. She clung to him as if her soul had burst open, her eyes wide with burning devotion. "You cannot escape me now," she whispered fiercely. "3 times you claimed me. You are mine forever." And Kale, breathing hard, realized he had stepped into a bond he no longer had the strength to deny. The chamber filled with smoke and screams as the rebels clashed with enemy soldiers. Kale moved like a shadow in the firelight, pulling the princess with him, his rifle spitting bursts that cut down any warrior who came too close. But even as he fought, he felt her eyes on him, her breath on his neck, her body pressed against his whenever he dragged her from danger. It was no longer only survival. Something else burned between them, stronger with every moment. The third time he had touched her horn lingered in his mind, the way she cried out, the way she trembled against him, and the way her voice had turned fierce as she swore he could never escape her. He wanted to ignore it, to focus only on the battle, but it was impossible. The princess no longer looked at him as a savior. She looked at him as if he was already hers. The rebels were brave, but they were falling one by one. Plasma bolts tore through the walls, spraying heat and light. Kale knew they could not hold the chamber. He grabbed the princess by the hand and pulled her toward a side tunnel. She followed without hesitation, her blade flashing as she struck down a soldier who blocked their path. They burst into the tunnel, the sound of battle fading behind them. Kale's lungs burned, his arms heavy, but he did not slow. The princess matched his pace, her glowing markings lighting their way through the darkness. When they finally stopped to catch their breath, her hand slid up to his chest again, her fingers curling against him. "You touched me 3 times, she whispered, her eyes shining in the dark. "Among my people, 3 is sacred. It is binding. You are no longer just mine. You are my chosen. Do you understand?" Kyle shook his head, still panting. I don't want to be chosen. I just want you safe. Her lips curved in a slow smile. Safe with you is all I want. Do not fear what has already been written. Before Kale could answer, a deep rumble shook the ground. Dust rained from the tunnel ceiling. He looked ahead and saw faint light spilling from the cracks, an exit leading to the surface. But as they neared, the ground trembled harder and a new sound echoed through the night air. Not soldiers this time, something heavier. A war beast. The enemy had unleashed one of their monstrous weapons, a hulking creature clad in metal plates, its roar shaking the stones. Kale's blood ran cold as the beast stepped into the path ahead, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Behind them, more soldiers gave chase, their shouts echoing closer. They were trapped. Kale lifted his rifle, knowing it would barely scratch the beast's armor. Still, he planted his feet, ready to fight. But before he could fire, the princess stepped in front of him, her blade raised, her horns glowing faintly. Her voice carried across the tunnel, strong and commanding. "You will not touch him," she shouted. The beast paused, its head lowering, its nostrils flaring. Kale stared, realizing the creature recognized her bloodline. It growled, torn between instinct and fear of royal command. The princess turned back to him, her eyes burning. "You see?" she said softly. "With you beside me, even monsters hesitate. Together, we are stronger than this war." Kyle's hands tightened on his rifle. He hated how her words stirred something inside him, something more dangerous than fear. She believed in him, bound herself to him, and now even her people's laws seemed to echo her vow. The beast roared again, and the soldiers closed in from behind. Kale raised his rifle, the princess raised her blade, and for the first time, he wondered if fate had pushed him into this war not to survive it, but to change it. The beast's roar shook the tunnel walls, echoing like thunder. Its massive frame blocked the only way out, armored plates gleaming under the glow of burning ruins outside. Behind Kale and the princess, enemy soldiers closed in, their weapons charging. Trapped between steel and death, Kale's mind raced. He pulled the princess close, his eyes scanning the shadows. "When I fire, you run," he whispered. But she only shook her head fiercely, her pink hair falling around her glowing eyes. "No, if you stand, I stand. I told you, I will not leave your side." Kale wanted to argue, but there was no time. The beast lowered its head, horns glowing faintly, its muscles bunching as it prepared to strike. Kale lifted his rifle and fired. Plasma bolts slammed against the beast's armor, sparks flying. But it only enraged the monster further. With a deafening roar, it charged. At the last second, Kale dove aside, dragging the princess with him. The beast smashed through stone, the tunnel shuddering from the impact. Dust and rubble fell all around them. Kale rolled to his feet, yanking the princess up as the soldiers behind opened fire. He spun, blasting two of them before they could aim. The princess leapt forward, her glowing blade slicing through another soldier, her movements fast and deadly despite her torn armor. The beast wheeled around, its glowing eyes locking on Kale again. This time, as it charged, the princess stepped between them, raising her blade high. Her horns burned with light and her voice rang out with royal command. "Stop," she cried. The beast froze mid-stride, trembling violently as if torn between its instincts and her authority. Kale blinked in shock. The creature lowered its head, snarling, but it did not strike. Instead, it bowed slightly, the metal plates on its back rattling. Kale stared, breathless. "You stopped it." The princess turned, her eyes glowing brighter. "No, we stopped it. It obeys because you stand with me. Don't you see? The bond makes you more than a soldier. You are part of me now. Even beasts feel it." Before Kale could answer, the soldiers behind them shouted in panic. Some tried to flee, others fired wildly, their shots sparking off stone. The beast roared again, this time lunging at the enemy instead of them. Screams filled the tunnel as it tore through the soldiers, ripping their lines apart. Kale grabbed the princess's hand. "Now's our chance, move!" They sprinted toward the exit, the ground shaking behind them as the beast destroyed everything in its path. When they burst into the open night air, Kale pulled her into cover among broken ruins. His chest heaved with exhaustion, sweat streaking through the grime on his face. The princess pressed close to him, her hand on his cheek. Her lips parted, her breath fast. "3 times you touched my horn, and now even the beasts obey us. Do you still think this is only chance? Or do you finally see what fate has done?" Kale met her eyes, and for a moment the war seemed far away. The way she looked at him, like he was her entire world, made his chest tighten. He wanted to deny it, to remind her he was just a soldier lost in someone else's war. But deep inside, a spark had already been lit. Before he could speak, distant horns blared through the night. Enemy reinforcements were moving. Cale glanced at the mountains in the distance, their dark ridges standing tall under the stars. That was their goal. If they reached the passes, they might survive. He gripped his rifle, then looked back at her. "We're not done yet. Can you keep running?" The princess smiled, fierce and beautiful in the firelight. "If you lead, I will never stop." And with that, they pushed onward into the night, bound together by war, by survival, and by a bond neither of them could break. The mountains loomed closer, jagged silhouettes against the star-filled sky. Kyle pushed forward through ash and rubble, his rifle clutched tight, the princess at his side. The air was sharp and cold, carrying the echoes of battle from the city they had left behind. Fires still burned in the distance, and the ground trembled from the enemy's machines. They had escaped the beast, but the night was far from safe. The princess's steps were steady, though her torn armor bore the marks of every fight they had endured. Her glowing markings flickered faintly, but her eyes never wavered from him. Every time Cale looked back, she was there, her hand brushing against his arm as if to remind him she would never let go. At the edge of a ruined bridge, Cale paused, scanning the ridges ahead. "We're close," he said quietly. "If we make it through that pass, the humans will have a camp there. We can regroup." The princess tilted her head, her voice calm but filled with something deeper. "And when we reach them, what then? You think your commanders will let you keep me?" Cale frowned. "My only goal is to keep you alive." Her lips curved in a faint smile. "But I told you already, my life is tied to yours. If they try to pull us apart, they will fail. I will not leave you, even if I must fight your own kind." Before Cale could reply, a sharp whistle cut the night. He shoved the princess down just as plasma bolts tore across the bridge, scorching the stone. Shadows moved from the ridges above, enemy ambushers waiting for them. Kyle rolled to cover, his rifle barking in return fire. The princess crouched beside him, her blade glowing faintly, her eyes blazing with fury. "They want me alive," she hissed. "But they will not have me." The ambushers closed in, their weapons lighting the night. Cale moved with precision, dropping soldier after soldier, but there were too many. A blast knocked him back, pain ripping through his arm. His rifle clattered against the stone. The princess cried out, dropping to his side. Her hands pressed against him, her markings glowing brighter, her face filled with fear. "No, you will not fall. Not you, not my chosen." Kyle gritted his teeth, forcing himself to rise. "I'm fine. Stay back," but she didn't listen. With a fierce cry, she rose to her full height, her horns glowing like fire, her blade sweeping in arcs of deadly light. The ambushers hesitated at the sight, fear flashing across their faces. She struck without mercy, cutting them down as if the bond between them had poured new strength into her veins. Kyle staggered to his feet, snatching up his rifle. Together they fought, their movements almost in sync, his shots cutting down those who tried to flank, her blade carving through the rest. When the last soldier fell, silence returned, broken only by the crackle of distant flames. The princess turned to him, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with something more than battle. She stepped close, her hand brushing his cheek, her voice trembling. "You bleed and I bleed with you. You fight and I fight with you. Can't you see? We are no longer two lives. We are one." Kyle's heart pounded. He wanted to deny it, to keep a line between them, but the truth was there in her eyes. She had bound herself to him completely, and though he fought against it, a part of him no longer wanted to break free. Far above, horns echoed again, enemy forces regrouping for another strike. Cale looked toward the pass, then back at her. "We're almost there, but the hardest fight is still waiting." The princess smiled faintly, leaning close enough that her breath warmed his ear. "Then let it come. As long as you stand, I will never fall." And with the mountain pass before them, Cale knew the final test was near. The mountain pass was cold and silent, the ground scattered with old battle wreckage. Broken weapons, shattered armor, and the blackened skeletons of machines lay half-buried in snow. Cale pushed forward with the princess at his side, his breath rising in white clouds, his rifle heavy in his hands. He could feel the weight of the war pressing down on them, the sense that the enemy would not let them leave alive. Behind them, horns blared again, echoing through the night. The enemy was closing in, their forces driving hard to cut them off before they reached safety. Kale tightened his grip on the princess's hand and pulled her faster toward the ridge. The glow of human signal beacons flickered faintly ahead. They were close, but then the ground shook. From the shadows of the cliffs, enemy warriors poured out, an entire strike force armored and armed, blocking the path forward. At their center stood a towering commander, his armor black and edged with crimson, his weapon glowing like molten steel. His voice thundered across the pass. "Return the princess, human. She belongs to us." Kale leveled his rifle, though his muscles ached and his strength was almost spent. "She belongs to no one but herself." The commander's laugh was cruel. "Do you think you can stop us?" "You are only one man." Before Kale could answer, the princess stepped forward, her horns glowing fiercely, her markings burning like fire across her skin. She gripped Kale's arm and raised her voice, strong and unyielding. "He is not only one, he is mine. And through me he is bound to the crown. To strike him is to strike me." The enemy commander hesitated, his troops faltering. Whispers rippled through their ranks. To harm the royal bond was to invite curses older than the war itself. Kale took the moment, raising his rifle high. "You want to fight? Then fight me, but you won't take her while I stand." The commander roared and charged, his massive blade swinging down. Kale met him head-on, dodging aside, firing bursts at the gaps in his armor. Sparks flew as steel clashed against stone. The princess struck as well, her glowing blade carving arcs of light. Together, they fought as one, Kale's precision covering her strikes, her speed shielding his weakness. The battle raged in the snow and fire until finally, with a roar of effort, Kale caught the commander's arm and shoved him back. The princess lunged forward, her blade piercing through his chest. The enemy leader fell, his body collapsing with a heavy crash. For a heartbeat, silence held the pass. Then the enemy troops broke, their fear overwhelming their orders. They scattered into the shadows, leaving only the fallen behind. Kale stood panting, blood on his face, his rifle heavy in his hands. The princess turned to him, her eyes glowing with pride and something deeper. She reached up, her hand cupping his cheek, her voice soft. "You stood against all of them. You touched my horn 3 times. You bound me. And now you have fought at my side as if you were born for this. There is no escape, Kale. Not for you, not for me. We are one now." Kyle stared into her eyes, feeling the weight of her vow. He thought of denying it, of telling her he was just a soldier who wanted to go home. But the truth was there in the bond between them, in the way she looked at him as though the entire galaxy could burn and she would still choose him. Slowly, Kale lowered his rifle. "Then if we're bound, we fight this war together." The princess smiled, radiant in the snow and fire, her hand still against his face. "Together, always." From the ridge ahead, human banners appeared as soldiers poured into the pass, rushing to meet them. But to Kale, none of it mattered. The war would continue, battles would rage, but his fate had already been sealed. He had grabbed the princess's horn to save her life, and in doing so he had bound his own life to hers forever.